Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the comprehensive yet informal study of Kant's critique of pure reason. Um, we should be pretty in stride today. We just recorded last night and got through the final transition to this part where we're at now, in which we will be, as you can see from the title, deducing the pure concepts of the understanding. Um, yeah, we talked a lot about what that means and entails, and it's a bit much, but a lot if you're new to Kant anyway. But the essence of it, maybe you could think of it as what I just explained to Harrison, in which we'll be explaining how the categories of judgment are related to like objectivity, in the sense of like our experience, representations. So we'll be showing what they are. Well, we were shown what they are. They're the tables of the pure concepts of the understanding. So we're basically going to be like looking at their transcendental origins in our experience and how they work and why they work. Which, as we explained last time, has to be a priori necessary, unlike what human Locke might have thought. Oops. So we're going to
I'm going
pay no attention to a
Gee,
photo of my dog.
my doggy.
Hello. So we're going to be going through sections 15 and 16 in this session. We'll be picking up section 17 next time. Do we have any remarks other than what I just said before we begin?
I mean, we did a whole transition already just yesterday, so I'm pretty eager to get into it.
Yeah. Any anything from you, Harrison?
No, let's get into it.
All right. Would anyone like to begin reading?
Sure, why not?
All right.
The manifold of representations can be given in an intuition that is merely sensible, i.e., nothing but receptivity. And the form of this intuition can lie a priori in our faculty of representation, without being anything other than the way in which the subject is affected. So basically, that's talking about, yeah, we could literally just have a bunch of senses like flashing in our face with no understanding or no comprehension of it. And also, the form of that could be given a priori, um, being space and time, uh, and that wouldn't really, include any thought of at all.
Mm.
Um, Yet the combination of a manifold in general can never come to us through the senses, and therefore cannot already be contained in the pure form of sensible intuition, for it is an act of the spontaneity of the power of representation. And since one must call the latter understanding, in distinction from sensibility, all combination, whether we are conscious of it or not, whether it is a combination of the manifold of intuition or of several concepts, and in the first case, either of sensible or non-sensible intuition, it is an action of the understanding, which we would designate with the title synthesis, in order at the same time to draw attention to the fact that we can represent nothing as combined in the object without previously having combined it ourselves. And that, among all representations, combination is the only one that is not given through objects, but can be executed only by the subject itself. Since its act is of itself activity, that sentence is too long.
Yes, it is. Do we want to break it down before we continue?
Actually, well, it's too long mostly because it's redundant and goes into itself like several times.
Yes, it does. But there were two things I wanted to touch on before we continued.
Well,
This first thing,
first,
what?
okay.
Uh,
Yeah, go ahead.
this first thing, it said, shoot, where is it? Something about like an intuition without. Hang on. Spontaneous. Whether we are.
Okay, well, I know what I'm going to say,
So,
so can I go?
yeah, sorry. Let me find this thing. Well, I thought I would find it, and I got lost in the wall of text. So you go first.
Okay, so he's talking about the combination of the manifold in general through the senses. So for easy example of this, like the example I remember when we were discussing Kant in my class, was of that rabbit duck, or various other images that if you look at a certain way, it looks to be one thing. What do you see? This or that, right? Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe pull up an example just for it, if you have a second. Like if you can just open up, like rabbit duck, I'm sure it'll come up. But yeah, so literally seeing not even the lines, but like black and white in space in some sort of origin, right? That's all the function of the sensibility. But in order to put that together and, as it were, like synthesize it,
Yeah, and judge
you
it as a
need,
duck or a rabbit.
right, as a duck or a rabbit, or even as a line, or even as an object, right? Even as one object, you need to use your mind actively. You can't just passively take in, oh, this is, one object and this is another object, or this is a duck, this is a rabbit. You don't directly see that. Instead, you make that judgment. You put that together with your mind actively. And so Kant is saying that this is a synthesis that comes from the understanding rather than a mere like play of sensations.
Yes, that's yes, basically.
So then, would that understanding, would that is the understanding part specifically the verbal or mental identification of saying that is a duck or that is a rabbit, or does it also
It would be
include
the mental.
So, but does it?
Oh,
I wonder, does it also include the way in which we experience the shape? Because sometimes, like if you're calling it a duck or a rabbit, both representations are in the image, but your isn't it say that like your visual side of your brain is focusing on certain focal points of the image, and is that also the understanding?
Can you clarify your question, please?
I guess is partly determined on the focal points in the image. Would I be? Is that correct?
Well, yeah. So it is the characteristics. It is the sensible characteristics that determined in what way the understanding is going to judge. So it's not operating in a vacuum, and it can't make any judgment.
Yeah. I guess I mean like is whether or not you visually choose to be to focus on one focal point versus another also the understanding, or would that be random or sensibility?
I would
or is
say
that
that's
both?
of the understanding because that focusing itself is an act of the understanding. Like you
Well,
can't.
maybe that's what this imagination is. Remember?
Yeah, we
talking
were
about
trying to figure out what the second step of the
like
synthesis
maybe
of the
maybe
manifold
maybe
was.
that's what it is, right? Because I'm not consciously using my understanding when I'm judging, oh, that's a duck or a rabbit. Maybe that step that like makes me able to see it in combination as a duck or a rabbit, maybe that's the imagination.
So then would
Yeah,
the imagination be like this thing where it isn't necessarily passive, but it isn't like we aren't
fully
necessarily
conscious
fully
either.
aware?
Yeah, it's like it's a
Maybe.
weird middle
I mean,
ground.
that's almost a random guess. We have been very frustrated for Kant by him not really explaining why we need this. Like, there's the step, right, of apprehending all the different things in sensibility together, right? And he calls that like synopsis, I think.
What do
Yes.
you mean by apprehend?
Like literally just I'm seeing black and I'm seeing white and they're together in one like sight image.
Yes, that's sensibility.
Right. So that's an act of sensibility. And there's obviously the act of understanding, putting things together, which in a unity, which he calls synthesis, right?
But there's an in between step where he says imagination comes in and does some
And also unites it
additional
in some way.
synthesis. Yeah, additional
That
unification. Yeah.
we're not sure in what way imagination adds to the unity.
Yeah.
Like
I guess.
he just hasn't
Yeah.
really clarified
But
that.
you that kind of Harrison that notion of like focusing that you were just bringing up, that could be it. We're thinking. We don't know. We
Yeah.
have no like uh, textual evidence or anything to support this theory, but this is just it's a good possibility, I guess, just like
Oh, yeah.
logically.
Okay.
Because that's a good thing to point out. I don't really make a decision to like view it as a duck or a rabbit, right?
It's
I
an
Yeah.
make a
unconscious
decision.
process. Not that Kant had that like psychological framework to work with at the 1780s, but that could be what
Oh, yeah.
he means though by imagination.
But
Maybe.
I guess like, I wonder what he thinks, because it's like there's kind of like because I wonder if you even need that third thing, because it's kind of isn't like
Well,
whether
you
or not
definitely need the
you
third thing because that's the apperception which we talked about yesterday, which is the self-awareness.
in the sense of like whether or not, because like whether or not you choose to focus, it can be both a passive or an active thing depending on the situation. Like whether or not, like
Yes.
if I'm showed the duck or the rabbit, maybe on initial impression, whatever I see first is passive, but I can, through like active focus, choose which focal point to focus
Right,
on.
but
So
we're
then
talking about like fundamental experience, and to have
I
fundamental
see.
like experience, you go beyond that. I mean, maybe if you're like a baby, you don't, but like any like person reading this book is gonna and like understanding it has to have that third part active because that's the experience, right? So we're
Oh
kind of
yeah,
just talking about experience. Yes, you are right that yes, in experience there are some, you're not always like self-consciously like comprehending everything. But you definitely are, at least somewhat, or else you wouldn't have a coherent like experience at
oh yeah,
all, or at least not in the way you are now.
yeah.
Um, cool. So does that answer that question?
A little bit. I guess the only thing is I was kind of, I think slightly doing the opposite, where I was, instead of doing like the glass half empty thing, glass half full, where rather than that meaning that it's all passive, that even the passive thing might be active, and it's just we're calling it passive. Like I guess, like, does it, for a
I
thing to
think
be
Kant would
active,
say
do
that
we,
basically.
for a thing to be active, does it necessarily have to, do we have to be able to reference it in our mind, or can it, or does it just have to be spontaneous?
It can be
I think Kant
spontaneous.
would, yeah, no, I think Kant would have to say that even unconscious processes have to be active for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Because
yeah, I guess
otherwise,
that's what I was talking about.
I
Yeah.
don't consciously have to go, oh yeah, I'm looking at all these parts and put that together. This must be a table. It's like I barely notice that I notice like this is a table. It just appears to me as a table basically, so that I can lose track of the fact that I am making this like spontaneous judgment.
Which I think is
So
like a big like drawing point of empiricism, and why like so many people like are attracted to that, because it's like it's so easy to mistake that for a purely passive thing. And that's the whole thing Kant is trying to clear up. He's like, no, this is way more active than you actually realize. Even though you don't
So,
realize it, it still is active.
so then that active thing would then also be unity of app. Wait, to clarify.
so the synthetic unity of apperception, as far as I know, is basically the ground of all.
What is?
You're breaking up a little, Harrison.
Yeah, you're gonna have to repeat whatever you're saying right now. Sorry.
Wait, me or Patrick?
You, Harrison.
I was saying is, so if the passive, not passive, but it like, or the active spontaneous, it just, because I just need a refresher, the active or spontaneous parts of the mind, that's the unity of apperception, or is that just the understanding?
That's the understanding.
So the ground of the
Unity of
understanding-
apperception happens through the understanding, which we're gonna get to more with
I
combination.
see.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that, so I don't worry about that too now. Yeah, just
So then I guess my only other thing is the unity of perception or the imagination. This third thing, would you say it's also a spontaneous process?
So the
It's
unity
just
of
a different
apperception and the
spontaneous process.
imagination are not the same thing.
yeah, they're
Well,
different.
they're not the same thing, but are they both spontaneous processes?
Yes.
Unity of apperception is I don't know about imagination.
Yes, question mark, because it
They're
seems that
different.
because imagination still combines and it unifies,
I
and
guess it must be.
yeah, so I think it has to be active by Kantian standards, but this is not very
Apparently it's
clear
not
still.
understanding. Yeah, apparently it's not the understanding, even though he says there are two parts: the understanding, which is active, and the sensibility, which is passive. And then he says, and
There's a
there's also
mysterious third thing called imagination.
Then wait, so what's the difference between the unity of apperception and the imagination?
Well, we don't know what
We
the
don't know yet
imagination.
because we don't know what imagination is.
We do
We
know
have
what.
we have a feeling that it might be what you said about like that kind of initial focusing before fully comprehending. We have a like because that is kind of a midway point. We have a feeling
I
that
was
is
like, maybe that's what he's talking about, but we have no idea what imagination is.
Yeah,
I
we
can
have-
tell you what unity of
So
apperception.
then, what we think is that the unity of apperception is the conscious combination of things, and the imagination is the in quotes passive combination of things. Maybe.
if you want to word it like that, yes, but like
Yeah,
make sure you quote
yeah.
passive because passive is not truly passive in the
Well,
imagination.
that's why I said I meant like.
Yeah.
I just realized I did air quotes with my hands.
Yeah, exactly.
In quotes,
So
like, in
yeah,
quotes,
you
passive,
could think of it
actually
like
passive,
that.
just unconscious.
You could think of it like that to like theorize about it, but we have no textual evidence to support that in terms
so
of
we don't
imagination.
know.
We
Got it.
really don't
Okay.
like know at
So,
all. We're just
understand.
speculating.
We're very confused by Kant's concept of the imagination here because he seems to have brought it in out of nowhere, doesn't really explain what it does.
But I was telling Patrick last night when we were doing this, but hopefully we can like get some more elaboration on it as we continue. So
So I remember even asking Dr. Lee about it, and he was like, "People don't know."
oh, you asked him about like imagination specifically?
Yeah, because I remember we were in class, and I asked him like, because we were talking about like unity, or we were talking about like understanding and sensibility, and I was like, well, like what's combining these things? I don't under like what.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, that's what Kant calls the imagination, and I was like, what that? And he was like, he said it was unclear.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll find it. Maybe we'll find what Dr. Lee's
Yeah,
missing.
we do.
Finally unlock the key to telling us what
Yeah.
Kant meant by imagination.
And then we can tell Dr. Lee, and he'll be like, "Well."
Exactly.
I think we should tell Dr. Lee. I think we should publish. You should publish a paper if you can figure it out.
Yes. But then, yeah, and we should read that. We should have Dr. Lee read our paper.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's go based academia grinding. Anyway, so that's that.
To just remind us, unity of apperception, right? Unity of apperception is that synthetic combination that says, hey, all these sensations that are coming, this is part of one experience, right? My experience, namely. So that's the synthetic unity of apperception. Much clearer than imagination.
At this point, anyway. And let's hope that changes, but we shall see. So moving on from that, I found where I was having trouble. The notion of nonsensible intuition in like the middle of the paragraph where my cursor is. What is nonsensible intuition? Because isn't intuition grasped by sensibility?
I'm sure he's using the term wrong.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sure that he means empirical and he is using his words wrong because he has done it before.
Yeah, I had a feeling, but I just wanted to check with you guys to see if you had any thoughts on that.
I am sure he means empirical and he is misusing his own terms because he's done it before.
Okay, that's a nice, straightforward answer. And then the last thing I wanted to point out before moving on, the importance of the subject here. In combination is a purely like subjective thing, if I'm interpreting this correctly, and that seems kind of important to note, given like how big of a topic subjectivity and its role in like reality and metaphysics is. This seems like a big thing to note.
Well, it adheres in the subject, so it's subjective in that sense. But Kant's whole derivation is based on the idea that it can be applied objectively to objects.
Right, but its initial origin, maybe, I don't know, is in the subject, and it's
according to subjective laws, and it applies objectively.
Yes, which is an interesting concept, but I just wanted to note that, and especially like the notion of self-activity. That's kind of like a big, important like, and we were talking yesterday about how like Kant can be very like empiricist, but this is definitely like a more rationalist detail, I guess. So I thought it was interesting to point that out. Just as important note so we can comprehend that. And then with that, I think everything else is pretty much covered. If there are no other questions, we can move on. Do you want to keep reading this pair? What's up, Harrison?
Sorry. Well, so I guess by self-activity, he's just saying spontaneous. The subject, only the subject can possibly do this.
Yeah, like combination. Okay. Objects don't combine themselves. Like
yeah, okay, that's what you're saying.
Representations, rather, is a better way to put. Representations can't combine themselves. The subject has to do that through. It is an act of self-activity, which also we're gonna. I think that has like relations to notions of freedom and other important concepts in German idealism. So it's just kind of a big like thing that I wanted to point out that we're gonna not like get too into it like at the moment, but I just wanted to know that that's kind of like an important thing to keep in mind as we continue.
Of course, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Patrick, do you want to keep reading this paragraph, starting with?
Oh yeah, we're only 2 sentences in.
Oh God, I forgot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please continue.
One can here easily see that this action must originally be unitary and equally valid for all combination, and that the dissolution analysis that seems to be its opposite, in fact, always presupposes it. For where the understanding has not previously combined anything, neither can it dissolve anything, for only through it can something be given the power, have been given to the power of representation as combined. That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying, how do we get this power of analysis? Well, it's actually through already combining, right? We have to synthesize something before we can break it down again.
Yes.
So in fact, with analysis, we are simply reviewing what we have already put together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna try to like compare it to Hegel, but then I'm biting my tongue because I want to make sure because I want to say that's like almost how like dialectics functions, but like that also adds things in the analysis, and I don't know if Kant is like going that far here. But that's not like really necessary. I think that was more just an interesting note. I think you explained that pretty well. Although is anything actually maybe this isn't important, like even just self-contained like question. Are things gained in analysis? Does that like is that imply? I don't think he explicitly says it, but like
no, he pretty much says that nothing is gained in analysis.
Okay.
Nothing new gained in analysis. We just clarify what we already have.
Yeah, that's kind of something that might be controversial.
Yeah,
and I think months ago we were talking about this when we were going over analytic versus synthetic. Like, is anything gained in analytic judgment? This is kind of a similar, if not the same, like problem. That it's questionable. I think.
Well, one of the interesting questions that has come up in analytic philosophy. I know you're not a fan, but this is an interesting sort of problem challenge. Is the morning star the same as the evening star? So both are Venus, but it seems like even though the morning star is the evening star should be a tautology because both are Venus, it tells us things.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah.
What is the morning star, evening star thing in reference to?
Venus. Venus is the morning star and the evening star.
But where does that cultural thing come from?
What do you mean?
I guess I've never heard what is the morning?
Those are just the names for Venus in the morning and Venus in the evening, or the morning star and the evening star.
Oh, okay. Got it.
But if someone were to say to you, the morning star is the evening star, and say you did not know that they were both Venus, you would clearly learn something. Whereas it doesn't seem like we should learn anything from tautologies, right? That's what Kant says.
Basically. Yes. Well, yeah. This is what I'm like challenging, and this is like I think why I brought up Hegel, because like in Hegel, analyzing a concept will like reveal its opposite or just more details like time and you know.
Right.
Specifically in your example, the passage of time would be like the biggest thing.
Right. For Kant, he says it basically serves a useful role in clarifying things, but it doesn't add any new information.
Right. Which
doesn't seem like my experience of analysis.
Yeah. Definitely not. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think something is definitely gained.
Yeah.
So questionable claim, but that's what Kant is saying, and that's his perspective.
Well, then there's also, I guess, the thing of like, can you even understand anything without analysis?
According to Kant, yes, because you've already
Well, he's
you've already
saying you
unified the manifold. Even
you've
though it
already
may
done
not be like as
this.
rich
No.
as or clarified as you would like, you've at least like gained something. That being an experience.
Okay.
Well, it's basically, I think basically the idea is if you've forgotten somehow something that you already did with synthesis, then analysis is useful to remind you, oh yeah, I can't have an idea of a married bachelor because a bachelor is unmarried, and that's about the extent of what analysis can do,
In Kant, yeah.
according to Kant. At least that's my reading of what Kant was saying about
Yeah,
analysis.
I do too. I just wanted to like make sure I had that right, and
Yeah.
that was properly controversial as I initially interpreted. So
Yeah.
okay, cool. Does anyone want to read this next paragraph?
I'll do it.
Cool.
But in addition to the concept of the manifold and of its synthesis, the concept of combination also carries with it the concept of the unity of the manifold. The representation of this unity cannot therefore arise from the combination, rather by being added to the representation of the manifold. It first makes the concept of combination possible. This unity, which precedes all concepts of combination a priori, is not the former category of unity. For all categories are grounded on logical functions in judgments, but in these combination, but in these combinations, thus the unity of given concepts is already thought. The category therefore already presupposes combination. We must therefore seek this unity as qualitative, someplace higher, namely in that which itself contains the ground of the unity of different concepts and judgments, and hence of the possibility of the understanding, even in its logical use.
Cool. So yeah, I think Kant is basically saying that don't confuse what he's talking about now, the synthetic unity, with the logical function of unity. That because logical function of unity already presupposes this transcendental synthetic unity. So to understand what it is, um, he clarifies as qualitative and refers to section 12, which I don't exactly remember uh, what that refers to, but that could have been where he's talking about why we need to go further and find the or deduce the categories in the first place. I have a feeling that's what that's referring to. And that's because this is so foundational to even the what was already pretty foundational, the categorical function of unity in the first place. But there is something deeper, which is the synthetic unity of the manifold, and we need to understand that to understand or to deduce, I guess, the even just the basic categorical function of unity.
Yeah.
Cool. That seems pretty straightforward to me. Um, I wonder if we have time to go over section 16 in like the 30 minutes that we have before Mark's study. It seems like we'd be pushing it, but we can try to do it if you guys are up for it.
Just flip through it again,
So here's like the first chunk,
and then
and there's,
oh
yeah, and
yeah,
then there's this. So I'm not super confident. Maybe we should just
yeah,
end it here and save that for next time.
yeah.
Cool. Is that also cool with you, Harrison?
Yeah.
All right. So we've gone over today on the possibility of a combination in general, um, which, as we saw, basically amounts to this thing, synthetic unity, which goes above and beyond, uh, metaphysically speaking, or transcendentally speaking, the category of unity, which is already pretty
What is
foundational in terms of the
what is the
understanding.
why is there a distinction between making this thing between the category of unity and the transcendental synthesis of unity?
Because the category of unity presupposes synthetic unity. The category of unity is not just like unity as like a general category. It's a specific function of the understanding of bringing um, like uh, representations together, whether they're concepts or intuitions. But we bring, if we recognize something as like one thing, that is like the categorical function of unity, or the logical function of unity. But to be able to
Okay,
do
so-
that, we have to first have this notion of synthetic unity of the manifold. Because if we don't have this, if we don't have a unification of the manifold through the synthetic unity of apperception, then we wouldn't have no like representations to consciously unify through the logical function of unity. Does that make
Well,
sense?
then I guess is so then is the function of unity the transcendental synthetic unification?
Uh,
Is like is it, are they is it saying that like that? I guess I'm kind of confused how they're different. Like what is
Okay.
the difference?
so I'll break them down. So the synthetic unity of the manifold is basically what you're talking about with the unity of apperception. Is that it's what gives you it's what ties together the like concepts and intuitions as a spontaneity act of the subject. That process
Yeah.
is the synthetic unity of the manifold. Now what the category of unity is that given you already have the synthetic unity of manifold, within that unified manifold you're able to like take certain objects or just other representations and go, ah, yes, that is one, that is a unit, and you're able to make statements like, I am going to eat this one apple or something that involves the logical function of unity found in the one apple. But to have any of that in the first place, you need to have the synthetic unity of the manifold to have an experience in which that one apple can exist in the first place.
I see.
So the logical function, the logical function that is unity, is something that already exists in the manifold. But the manifold has to be unified synthetically and transcendentally. Does that all make sense?
So then, by in the manifold being this kind of collection of intuitions,
The manifold is just the experience.
the experience. So
The manifold. No, it's the manifold's not an experience yet, because the manifold.
Well, once it's synthetically unified with the
But then it's not. But then that would be like it would be redundant to say the synthetic unity of the manifold. The manifold has to be unified. So the manifold.
Sorry. Okay.
So
Yeah.
we-
So when I said manifold, I probably should have said unified manifold.
Which would just be experience.
Yes.
So then the concept, or so when we say what's the difference between the concept of unity and the category of unity, or is that the same thing?
The concept of the unity and the what?
So is the category of unity, is that a concept or is that a separate thing from, is the concept of unity? and the
That is a
category of
a
unity?
categorical. That is like a categorical judgment, which is like, which yes is a concept, I guess technically, but
I think the difference between a category and a concept is that a category is a concept applied to actual objects.
Yes.
Okay, I see. So then, the
So when he's deriving the categories, it's
Okay,
not this
so
idea
then
that
you're
he's
saying
coming
that
up with
the
the idea of like he's not coming up with the idea of unity. He's explaining how unity can be properly applied to objects.
I see.
But to even be able to do that, you already have to have a unified manifold, which is a different kind of unity. It's a transcendentally synthetic unity, or it's a transcendental synthetic unity of apperception, namely, which we'll get to later. And then once you have that unified manifold, then within that unified manifold, you can you can exercise the function of unity, which is that second kind of unity that he talks about, which is found in section 10.
So
The difference is the synthetic unity of apperception is the unity of your experience, not anything in your experience.
Exactly, which is why I brought up the apple versus like the unified manifold in which the apple exists in the first place.
I see. So is the difference between the kind of, like, as we were talking about earlier, like that conscious, I'm combining these two things and I'm actively thinking about it, versus the unconscious combination that is pre.
No, I don't think so. Really, what's going on here is just a two-step process. So, which involves two different types of unity. So the first type of unity is involved in the first step, in which you're unifying experience together. You're unifying the manifold
Yes, but
together.
do you consciously do that, or do you unconsciously do that?
So before you know that, let me put it really simply.
Mhm.
Before you know that there are objects, you have to be aware of yourself as a subject,
Mhm.
right? Before you're like, oh, this is an object in front of me, you have to have a me. So the awareness that you are a subject is the synthetic unity of apperception.
So
Where-
then you're saying you have to, like, be aware of yourself as a unit. You have to unify yourself as a unit first before you can unify anything else.
Yes.
You can't make any judgments without self-awareness, according to Kant. No
Okay, I
judgments are
see.
possible without self-awareness.
And that unity
And then
is the first kind of unity.
okay, and then and just so clear, is there any um slight is that definition slightly simplified, or is that just what it is? Like,
That
is there
is
anything I'm
what
missing
that's
in my
what it is.
understanding by going with that?
What definition?
Well, the idea that it is just I must be aware of myself as a subject first, because you said you were simplifying it. So I'm wondering, like, is there more to understand there, or is that just what
Content
it
wise,
is?
he's not really simplifying it. He's just simplifying in terms of language. Like fundamentally, that's what
Oh,
it is.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, synthetic unity of apperception, fortunately, is a super simple concept.
It just involves lots of like, not even lots of parts. It just involves parts that have lots of like heavy conceptual like framework that you need to understand. And honestly, it's not even that like heavy in general. It's more just like in Kant, understanding Kant is like the Kant needed to understand them is like the difficult part.
Yeah.
You need Kant to understand Kant.
Yes,
I
and
see.
Kant is not that hard to understand once you understand that Kant
Kant.
is like difficult to read.
For no reason.
Other than yeah, he just
Yeah.
he made it like that. So one of like the most profound insights of like human thinking has been like greatly hidden by jargon and walls of text that are repetitive as well. Unfortunate, but that is also to get like reflexive and reflective or whatever. The one of the purposes of the study to break this down so it becomes accessible and we can understand that we are understanding ourselves, and that is what is experience is crazy.
And hopefully figure out what the hell imagination is.
Yeah, we that would be cool. That would be
I
actually.
need to know.
I would really like to cognize that. And
Actually, I don't know. I don't know if we want to keep this in the study or not. But I was on imagine. This is not. I guess I don't think this doesn't give an answer at all. But this is more just something I've been thinking about because
sure.
I was I one of my friends from high school, we kind of have a side debate where we go back and forth on, like, just kind of casually talking about determinism versus compatibilism.
Yeah.
And I was like I think up until like very recently I was very much like, it's either like you're either like compatibilism just does not make sense. This is just I don't understand. This is just not right. And then and that was more just because I was attributing that, like, it just cannot be for like mathematical and physical reasons. And then I recently found this concept of emergence.
Oh, okay.
Which
Yeah, that's a big
which
thing
is
in like analytic philosophy as well.
emergence.
Kant would say that it's impossible to know whether we have free will or not. It's strictly.
He does talk about that. That's one of the antinomies, right?
Yeah, it is one of the antinomies, in the it's one of the most important antinomies. It
Well, I
says
guess it depends on
strictly
how are we
impossible to know.
how are we defining free? Like, what is free will?
I think for Kant, it's the idea that a human action is self-caused,
It's
pretty
the
much.
Aristotelian like
Yeah.
notion, right? Same thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess like the emerge, and this is where I still I don't know if it's right, but it's more I just have lots of questions, and like it's very interesting because it's this idea that like mathematically we can prove that there are systems that um that are when built from smaller parts end up becoming not greater, I guess you could say greater, the sum ends up becoming greater than the parts, in that the sum, like where through the parts you cannot predict the sum, and the sum actually indirectly directs the parts.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of like I think relating to this to like to Kant, which I think is like what you're maybe trying to do. Um, that's kind of like what the whole like unity of apperception is. It's taking like the sum of its parts and through like the subject self activity making it greater. Like obviously yes, we have concepts and intuitions, but we like combine them and then it becomes like an actual coherent experience, which is much greater than just concepts plus intuitions. Like the subject's whole self activity and freedom is what that's known as in like in German idealism. That's what makes it greater than the sum of its parts. So
Which then
like
I actually, yeah,
so subjective experience is literally like that is I think what you're to tie what you're saying that thing where we like mathematically take systems like the system of subjective experience itself and I guess objective experience as well as we're seeing in this section applies to how subjectivity intertwines with objectivity. That whole process is an example of what you're talking about. That is a system that is greater than the sum of its parts.
yeah, and I guess this maybe is more something like I maybe possibly didn't fully understand um the extent of Kant or German idealism, because like
Oh, you're breaking up again a little bit. But yes, freedom. That's why freedom is big in German idealism, and why German
well, I
idealism
was
is
gonna
like
say
so
I
cool and
think this
important.
yeah yeah I think for me because so Kant was Kant what was his view on determinism, or was he just like we can't know?
Again, he says we
Yeah,
can't know. However, he says that the foundation for morality is the belief in freedom. He says it's impossible to know, but he does believe
Of course,
in free will. So,
yeah,
and he says that it's morally necessary to believe in free will.
yes,
So he says that we can believe it because it's impossible to know, and furthermore, it's impossible to even like have a probabilistic guess. Like it's
yeah,
completely outside of our understanding, and therefore, for moral reasons, we should adopt the belief in free will.
yes,
That's what Kant says.
okay,
and other German idealists take that like much more radical, which is where like Fichte and Hegel and all them and Schelling they all take freedom to be like, no, that is like the essence of like human experience. And it's not just like a mere belief. It is like what foundationally creates reality. Like basically is freedom. Um,
Well, it's the essence of meaningful human experience for Kant because the summum bonum is morality.
yeah.
Is
I'm
moral
not saying it's meaningless in Kant. I'm just saying it's more like metaphysically important than or metaphysically yeah, I guess important or valid or whatever maybe the word is. But um,
right.
Kant kind of like limits it to like uh, an unknown thing that is like we should believe in, but like it is the most like fundamentally like knowable thing in other systems like Fichtean
Right.
and Hegelian and
Sure.
Schelling, basically Kant's successors, um,
yeah,
which is super interesting.
Successors. I mean, he would roll in his grave.
I mean, he totally would roll in his grave, but they just didn't give a fuck, to be honest.
Because his successors were like, we could use this to take rationalism to even more crazy speculative
Yes,
heights.
which is honestly what enamors me about this field of philosophy and why I've been into it and why I want to go back and do these studies because I find that so fascinating and important and based. I'm a big rationalist, extremist guy, even if it's not always true. The well, I don't know. I'm just gonna stop talking. I'm
he's
gonna
a
start
little
digging.
he's a little bit too extreme. We were going over later. He thought we could simply derive laws of natural science.
Hey,
I mean,
yeah,
Kant-
listen. That's such a cool idea, and it should be at least tried and explored, even if it ends up being at least we know, at least we learned something at the very least. There's no losing. You either learn that you can or you do.
I'm doing science right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. On
Yeah.
that note, this is starting to run a bit long, so I'm gonna end here. But we got lots of cool context there at the end, and motivation for continuing this work and this study.
some context.
Yeah, like philosophical context, some surrounding
Some
interesting questions.
context.
Context. Good lord. Okay. Yeah. You know it's time to end the study when the bad puns begin. Yeah, we'll see you next time for section 16 on the original synthetic unity of apperception. Yippee!
Yippee!